We now have the pleasure in welcoming the Indiana Pacers radio host and sideline reporter. He is also the post-game locker room reporter for FS1 and also the play-by-play voice of the WNBA's Indiana Fever, as well as the host of the Sideline Guys podcast. We welcome Pat Boylan onto Hoopsology. How's it going, Pat?
Hey guys, appreciate you having me. Sorry for having such a long title and making you rattle through all of that. But thanks for the time here. It's good to chat with you.
No problem at all. So, Pat, let's get started. And we wanted to talk to you about the Pacers because it's a team, just in full honesty, that I think doesn't get a lot of attention that should. And I just want to ask you, just with just a general question, how has the Indiana Pacers really felt going through this season, through all the canceled games, just through the trade through with Victor Oladipo? How has the team held up so far as we approach the All-Star break in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, there's certainly been many unique dynamics to this season that have added to, I think, just more turbulence than a typical year might have. Some of those you went in expecting, and other teams are too. The COVID issues, for example. Now, the Pacers have been fortunate that they've stayed away from their own COVID-related issues. As far as I know, they've had none of them. But we had a game canceled earlier in the year at Phoenix, and overall, we're doing pretty good in terms of avoiding cancellations. And then we hit a couple back-to-back here. One with the game in Houston, that having to do with the weather issues going on in Texas. And then we had the Spurs on the following Monday coming up here. That was canceled because they have some COVID issues within the Spurs organization. So all of a sudden, we kind of have been hit hard here. The Pacers are going to go a week without playing, from one Wednesday to the next Wednesday without playing. They're far from the first team to have this situation play out. But considering it hasn't happened to us in our organization yet, it's kind of the first time where you've had an extended stretch of play. You also noted the Victor Oladipo trade. I think it's a trade that the front office makes 10 times out of 10 if they get the opportunity, even knowing that Caris LeVert is not readily available. And clearly a trade like that was, massive for Caris's health and well-being. But it still goes to show that this is a trade that the franchise liked bigger picture. In the short term, you've traded a 20-point-per-game scorer for nothing right now until you get LeVert back. So that obviously poses a lot of challenges. And because of that, it's kind of been a year when you add a new coach as well. There's some adjustments to that. It's kind of been a year so far of one step forward, one step back. But as Pacers fans know well, they've had poor injury timing the last couple of years and haven't been at their best come playoff time. So I think they would gladly trade, a 500 or so first 29, 30 games if it means they're going to get guys healthy and can hopefully be playing with their full allotment of players come playoff time.
And how do you think the team is feeling morale-wise? Because you had Doug McDermott on your podcast recently, and he mentioned that, as you mentioned also, a lot of the key players have been hurt this season, but yet you guys are fifth in the West, and fifth in the East, I apologize. And looking at the standings, the powerhouse teams of the Bucks, Nets, and 76ers, it's not like the records are incredible. I mean, there's a lot of room to move up in the standings here. Is there a level of optimism, despite being one game above 500, that the Pacers can really make some moves after the All-Star break if things break their way?
Yeah, I think so. And I think you've kind of hit on an important point there that I'm not sure is getting enough attention, which is just the fact that what's happening in the East, to me, really isn't all that surprising. I thought you'd see more of this just due to COVID. It's tougher to put together long winning streaks. The home court advantage is not as significant. Out West, you have seen some of the top teams start to separate, but it's fascinating. Right around this point last year, the Pacers were, I believe, 19-10, and they were in sixth. And this team is only a game over 500, but they're in fifth. So a lot of the teams that were around them last year, including the Pacers, were off to better starts. There's just been a lot more uncontrollable aspects that have happened, I think, to a lot of these teams. Milwaukee's undergoing a lot of change. The Sixers have played well. Miami has had a tough start. You look at everything that Toronto is trying to deal with, not even playing in the same country that they're in. Boston has dealt with a lot of injuries, and they're still trying to get things figured out. And so I think because of that, my only worry from a Pacers perspective was you can't dig yourself too deep of a hole here. Without LeVert, without Warren, you're not going to be the type of team that you hopefully will be at the end of the year. But you have to avoid digging yourself into a deep hole So that way, when you hopefully get these guys back, you're not into too big of an uphill climb to get out of before the end of the season. So while I do feel like this group feels like they can be and should be better than one game over 500 and that they'll get there, the good news of all of this is it's not like they're out of position for any of their goals by any means. And hopefully if Indiana, who has won 3 of their last 4, I'm not sure if momentum carries over a whole week they're going to have off here, but if they can kind of get things back on track and win just a few more than they lose, once they hopefully get those guys back, I think they're pretty well primed to strike and to hopefully finish in one of those top 4 positions.
Pat, can you give us kind of, just piggybacking off of what you were just saying there? I mean, in your opinion, as someone who is team, I mean, what do you get the sense is of what is this team's ceiling and floor? Because I mean, I could see the Pacers with the continuity on the team, and if they're able to get some pieces back, maybe they're a team like the Miami Heat of last year that can make, I don't know about getting out of the East, but maybe a deep playoff push unexpectedly so because of continuity. What do you see as their potential ceiling or floor this year?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating question because on one hand, you started the year by bringing a group back that was almost entirely the same group you had the year before. The Pacers made very little offseason movement, but they changed a coach, which has, its challenges. And I still think, there's still aspects that you're trying to still get used to, even though you've been around each other for a couple months, even though the system is in place. This is, kind of a slow build when you bring in a new coach. And so I think some of that has led to the 500 or so start. I think how they're currently constructed right now, like if they weren't getting LeVert and Warren, which they hopefully will get those 2 guys back, and it sounds like perhaps LeVert even sooner rather than later, I think you would say, look, you've got an all-star in Sabonis, a borderline all-star type player in Brogdon, some decent players around them. If things tip your direction, you could make life hard for an opponent in the first round and maybe even snatch a playoff series if everything goes right. But I think what makes things interesting is the Karis LeVert and TJ Warren angle of when you get those guys back. Look, the Pacers don't have a Giannis. They don't have a guy who's playing at the level of Joel Embiid right now, and maybe not even somebody like Jason Tatum right now. But I'm not sure there's another team that 1 through 5, especially in the Eastern Conference, that 1 through 5 potentially has as much high-level depth as the Pacers would have in that scenario. I mean, you'd be running a lineup out there that has Malcolm Brogdon and Karis LeVert and TJ Warren, Miles Turner, Domantas Sabonis. You've got 4 20-point per game scorers in there and a guy who's a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. And then what that, of course, also does is it puts these guys like Doug McDermott and Justin Holiday, Aaron Holiday a little bit, TJ McConnell, guys who, Jeremy Lamb certainly, guys who have been starting and making appearances in the starting lineup. They all then get to come off the bench, and you get to utilize guys like that more. Your bench becomes better when this happens as well. So I think their ceiling's really high. We know superstars drive this league, but also I'm not sure we've seen a team that has tried to do what Indiana has succeeded in doing in terms of their roster makeup, and that they've got 5 guys, when healthy, that none of them would surprise you if they made the All-Star game next year, for example. And so I think that makes them a really interesting dynamic. They don't have an MVP candidate, but they might have 5 guys who can make an All-Star game, and I think it would be fascinating if they can get healthy to see, that dynamic play out.
Pat, can you just go over just in terms of this season compared to the bubble? And you have experiences also with the WNBA bubble as well. What has it been in terms of the players, in terms of travel, their morale, and then I believe even with, again, with Doug McDermott, I referenced that podcast again, he said, you have those a couple of thousand fans, in the arena. That's made a huge difference. Do you see that possibly increasing in terms of having more fans be in the arena? And how do you think, if that is the case, that affects the team? In fact, if COVID cases go down and you see less restrictions and you get more fans into the arena this year and helping this team make a playoff push?
Well, I definitely think it's something that all home teams are missing. Look, it's been great to have 1,500 or so fans, but the reality is this is a building that seats 17,000 people. That's not even 10% full. So it's great to have some of those fans in the building, but in a normal environment, I'll tell you, I get the incredible privilege to sit on the floor on game nights. And when it's a crowded, the Pacers are by no means the only team like this, but when it's a crowded arena and a big game and it's close in the fourth quarter, I mean, it is loud. The place feels like it shakes. It is a massive home court advantage. And even with 1,500 fans, you're just never going to get that. And I think it's possible that, that number continues to trickle up. I don't know for sure. But I would be surprised if we got to the point this year where you had anything resembling that. So I think that's a big storyline for every team, but the Pacers especially. Indiana as a franchise has 31 consecutive seasons where they've had a winning record at home, which is really remarkable. And right now they're 7-9, so they're just below that mark right now. And I'm not sure, if you look at the Pacers, really since 2017, their home court advantage has been huge. It's kind of been the storyline of the team, like can they play about 500 on the road and then continue to play great at home? And they haven't played great at home, and they've been actually pretty decent on the road, which has been an interesting trend, I think. And home teams are winning about 52% of games this year, so there is a home court advantage, but not a massive one. But I think it's something this team, has to figure out between now and the end of the year. You can't realistically be 500 at home and achieving the type of goals that you want to this season. So I think they've got to figure out, like, if you're not going to have 17,000 or even 10,000 fans in the building, how can you still turn that into enough of a home court advantage to where you're winning a lot more often than you're losing there? That when you have long home stands, that they can turn into big chunks of wins. And unfortunately, that's something that has kind of been maybe a surprising Achilles heel to this season, but I think it's something ultimately that they'll get figured out. I'm not sure we're going to see the typical home court advantage this year that you normally see, but I think as the year goes on, like, they've just played in an abundance of close games at home too, and been on the losing end of those more often than not. I think that is kind of a trend that will turn, especially as the year goes on. And I'm not totally sure what the answer to that is, and I'm not even totally sure the players or the coaches do, just because we've never experienced this before. Like, this is such new ground for everybody dealing with this. But my sense is, goes on, home court advantage around the NBA creeps up just a little bit more, and that the Pacers are able, to turn that into an advantage themselves. But I do think for them to have the type of success they want this year, they're going to have home court advantage be an advantage. And so far, they're still trying to figure that out.
Given the depth of this roster, and you've got a lot of potential with Karis LeVert coming back, you already made a big trade, trading off Victor Oladipo. Do you see the Pacers as maybe content to sit back at the trade deadline and kind of see what they have with that talent on the roster once everyone comes back?
Yeah, I think that's probably the approach they take. I would be surprised if they were really active around the trade deadline. But I do think when you got Kevin Pritchard and a front office like this, it's an aggressive front office. Like, they're turning over every leaf. Who would have seen that happened coming, right? Like, Karis LeVert trade came totally out of left field for all of us. And that's an example of you just never know. I think around the trade deadline, if they can find the type of move that they feel like is going to make a long-term benefit, then I think all bets are off. I think they would make that trade, absolutely. I think they're still kind of thinking big picture with all of this. But especially when you consider the contract situation, I think it's going to be a lighter trade deadline for the Pacers. Now that Karis LeVert is in play, you've got every single guy on your roster through this year and through next year. And most of them, I shouldn't say on the roster, I should say in the starting five, and most of the bench too, are now on timeline deals where you're not worried about losing them in free agency next year and for most of the next couple of years. So they've been able to build now, I think, pretty close to what they were hoping for. And I tend to think a lot of the major movement is done. You never know. But with just the timeline of a lot of these contracts that the Pacers have, I really think they want to see if they can get LeVert healthy. They want to see if they can get Warren. They want to see what that dynamic is like with all five of them on the floor, because you can't even try to improve that until you know what it is. And so you became a jump in a trade like the Pacers did in Houston, where maybe you make a move that big picture suits you. I would be surprised to see it. And the Pacers are pretty close to the luxury tax. So they don't really have a ton of money to play around with either. And they don't really have any bad contracts either. I think that's another just fascinating aspect of this team is the way they've been built. You would not look at a single player and say, guy's on a bad contract, that guy's on a bad deal. So I mean, for all those reasons, I tend to think it's a lighter trade deadline, but you never know. Sometimes it's the years that you least expect that something significant happens, like the Victor a month plus ago.
Sure. Final question for you, Pat. Can you just discuss the Miles Turner Venmo situation in terms of how he turned that into one fan just kind of being negative and turned that into a gesture for a positive cause?
Sure, this has been a fun one to watch unfold the last few days. I don't know all of the specifics of it because I wasn't watching it happen live. But apparently, there was some fan who didn't like how Miles played a few games in Chicago, and for some reason, he felt like that entitled him to 100 of Miles Turner's dollars, which I'm not sure where he made that connection. But he sent him a Venmo request, and Miles responded by sending him a penny for your thoughts. But then what happened was something kind of fascinating, and it's the good power that social media has. Is a bunch of NBA fans around the league just started sending Miles a penny or 2 pennies and something more, and then all of a sudden Miles went into his Venmo account and saw $250 and was like, "Wait a minute, we can do good with this." So he went to Twitter and said, "Hey, any money that you donate, I will pass along to the people in Texas. I will match that donation." And then recently I've seen that I believe it's the Players Association has come to Miles and also said they will match that donation. So, for math here, if the fans donate $10,000, Miles will donate $10,000. The Players Association will donate $10,000. They'll get $30,000 to the people in Texas, who have been going through a lot of challenges or so ago. Miles, who don't know, is from the Dallas area, and he went, the University of Texas, so he lived in Austin. So he's, in regular contact with those people down there. So Miles is somebody who's been so impressive, really bigger picture since he got here. Miles Turner was drafted, and he had his introductory press conference. And in that introductory press conference, he announced an initiative called, which stands for We All Really Matter, and still exists, but has to do with helping the homeless and creating, bags of items for homeless people, basic sanitary needs, and things like energy and protein bars. So this is something that Miles Turner has been involved with, and an initiatives that he has been heavily involved. Really, his whole NBA career. Most recent example one is it's been a fun one to watch, and I think it's still going. If you follow his social media channels, you can see exactly but I believe he's just the same as his Twitter account on Venmo. If anybody is listening and interested in donating, I believe just original _ Turner on Venmo, and you can find him. And if you send him some money, it'll go to the people in Texas. So tip of the cap to Miles, because he's, as all NBA players do, they've got a lot going on right now, and for him to be thinking bigger picture of those who are less fortunate, I think says a lot about him.
Great, Pat. Thank you very much for joining us. Please let our listeners and viewers know where they can find you on social media, and then any other projects and things that we should watch out for in 2021.
Yeah, I really appreciate the time. I'm just at Pat Boylan Pacers on Twitter and social media, and we do obviously a bunch of Pacers-related content that we share along there, including our podcast, which is The Sideline Guys. Me and our NBA fan or a Pacers fan listening that will want to come and check out our Indiana Pacers content, we would love to have you. And I've got information on my Twitter on where you can find all those things. But I really appreciate the time here to talk with you guys, and best of luck with it.
Much appreciated, Pat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat.